Live. Hello, everybody. Good morning or afternoon or evening or middle of the night, wherever you are in the world. This is part 2 of Yogi to Yogi. There were so many good questions from the last session that deserved very full answers. If you've been studying with us for a while, you know it's hard for me to give a very short answer because out of context, it's very difficult for people to understand some of the answers. So let's pick up where we left off. We were just about to get into the fun stuff, as somebody said, that wrote in the comments and the chats. I thought that was great. Just when the fun stuff is coming, he came off. I thought all of it was fun, because I think all of this stuff is very interesting. But anyway, if you mean the entertaining stuff, yeah, I get you. Elodie asked, Carlos Castaneda mentioned an assembly point on the egg-shaped net of energy thread of a human being. In the book, it said that sorcerers can move this point and therefore project another version of reality. I've found similarities in Dzogchen. Can you explain it from a yogic standpoint? Well, I think it'd be good to have you on live and tell me what you found from Dzogchen, Elodie, that is a similar standpoint, because I've been studying Dzogchen for like 20 years now, and I have never seen a really similar thing to Castaneda's. So maybe you mean something that I don't understand. But let's start with Castaneda. Everybody wants to know. First of all, referencing Carlos Castaneda's work as a spiritual path is super dangerous because Castaneda was not really a spiritual practitioner himself. He was a guy that went to UCLA. He has a very interesting history, shall we say, interesting history, in and out of trouble. And he went to UCLA to do some work on some doctoral thesis because he was going to start a movement or something. There's lots of really good books out on him, actually, exposing him as kind of a fraud, spiritually speaking. He started a cult, so he got this book out and he started a cult, his very first book. Now, I love the books, believe me. I'm a fan of his as a writer. I'm definitely not a fan of his as a person. So what he did to understand Castaneda's work, because a lot of you have read it and you're influenced by it, as I was at a point in my life too, until I found out. By training more in Indian Tantra, Buddhist Tantra, Dzogchen, Taoism, and so on, I started to realize, man, he's pulling stuff from everywhere. And I had a Native American background in shamanism and so forth, so I started thinking, is this really Mexican or whatever? So anyway, it turns out that Castaneda pulled from a lot of principles of like yoga Shaivism, and Tantra in general. And then also, most of what he was experiencing that he learned from so-called native Mexicans were from Navajo Indians in Arizona. And, he got exposed over years and so on. So you have to take the books as novels and fiction and fun for what they are. Now, there are some great principles in there, like when he goes into the petty tyrant and destruction of the ego by having a petty tyrant. Man, I think he pulls that directly from the Mahavrata tradition in Shaivism, because that doesn't exist in Buddhism. It doesn't exist in Theravada, Mahayana, or Vajrayana. It doesn't exist in Dzogchen. So I think he pulled that right out of Shaivism. The Mahavrata was when you put yourself in a position to be shamed and made guilty of something that you didn't even do, so that you can have everyone ridicule you and lambast you every time they see you. So you're out, you're exiled basically from community. On top of it, people are, throwing shade at you all the time, so you can whittle down your ego. This is the petty tyrant principle from his books, which is really great. There's also the great overview of the general principle that you can only go so far with your mind. And that he does a great job of showing, but then he's, leads us into the only solution for going past our mind is taking drugs. And this is where I part company with him again. Yes, I've done all this stuff and been trained as an ayahuasquero back in the 80s in the Amazon, but I'm telling you, you don't need drugs to go beyond your mind if you have proper training. If drugs were absolutely essential to the spiritual path, how is it that so many Dzogchen masters are still rainbow light bodying, never even took a drink of alcohol? So it's ridiculous to think, I have to have drugs to go past my mind, to go out of my concepts. No, you don't. Just need proper training. And the other one, someone asked something about, maybe we'll get to it later, about sexual practice. Is it absolutely essential to get realized? Oh, it's Elodie right here, I think. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get to it right in this series of questions. Now that we've properly contextualized Carlos Castaneda as a great fiction writer who drew from all kind of stuff, but had none of these experiences himself, and I don't think he ever flew. I don't think he had teachers who could fly. I think that's all baloney. Let's get into this question about the assemblage point. The assemblage point is a really cool concept, that there's an energy body full of threads, and you have one point on the crisscrossing hairs of this energy body where your whole consciousness assembles. And it's a beautiful symbol. It's not found in any of the yogic work. Contrary to your question here saying you found it in Dzogchen, Dzogchen doesn't even deal with the energy body, actually, with channels and chakras very much at all. Real Dzogchen doesn't deal with that. It goes directly to the mind. And then in tantric yoga of Shaivism and Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism and so forth, I've never come across this concept either. So modern teachers certainly have brought this kind of stuff in from Castaneda, from other things as well, because basically they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have any real lineage from India, so they had to, put it in from wherever they could get it from. So there's no assemblage point like that in Dzogchen work or in yogic work, unless you're considering this idea, one idea. The only one I could really relate to it is this. The mind is mediated by the central nervous system, and on a physical level and on an energy level, the mind is mediated by the channels and chakras. It's sort of mediated by it and formulates this expression in the world as mind function through the channels of chakras. So when someone's having a certain type of thought, if you stop for a moment anytime during the day, if you try this yourself, you stop and you say, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What's the quality of my thought? What's the quality of my energy? What's the content of my thought? Oh, I'm very emotional right now. I'm very moody. Okay, second chakra. Oh, I'm very much feeling the power of the spaciousness of reality. Fourth chakra. So what happens is as your energy moves through your energy system, we may think our mind is like something separate, like an object, but it's not. It's a process, and it's an expression and a medium. And it's a medium for expressing and connecting to the so-called outer or inner world through the outer or inner senses, but it's also mediating that experience as well. So my lens of perception can come from a chakra. My lens of perception or the content of what I'm experiencing in a moment can come from a nadi, an energy channel. That's about as close as we get to Castaneda's energy egg of energy and assemblage point. Okay? And I have dabbled in some of his work when I was younger, the physical practices and the energy practices, and someone taught me how to shift the assembly point. So actually I learned from a direct lineage of Castaneda how to shift the energy point, the assemblage point, and which he made up, as far as we can tell, for sure, he made it up. So, all right. Sorry to trash that because, there's such wonderful books and so much fun, but it's just not useful for your spiritual work, except for the few examples I gave just then. I felt that in meditation, psychedelic use, it's just this focus point that is changing. The problem is that we crystallize it by repetitive action and the self-image maker. Yeah, that applies to what I said, right? Number 2, can you explain how important Maituna is? Maituna means sexualized meditation. Can you explain how important sexualized meditation is to open consciousness? Gnostics say it's primordial, or I think you mean by that very, very important. And then you put early Vajrayana said the same thing, or maybe I put that. I can't remember if I put notes in here for you or not. So let's talk about that. Is it essential to, let's see, I think you said open consciousness. Now, open consciousness is such an abstract term, Elodie. What do you mean, open your consciousness? I mean, a loud noise can open my consciousness. A thought can open my consciousness. So if you mean like awaken the Kundalini Shakti and create the recognition of the nature of your own mind, or realization, recognition of your essence, Pratyabhijna experience or Rigpa experience, can sexual practice do that? Of course, it can, of course. It's considered to be the practice par excellence. The fruit of everything comes through it in real tantric practice of India, and ancient Tibet. So both tantric Indian yoga and Buddhist Indian and Tibetan yoga said that the sexual practice is one of the highest practices. And books like Dr. Nita's book, Karma Mudra, are coming out saying, hey, from authorities like him, et cetera, are saying, hey, this is a neglected practice now. This was considered one of the most important practices. So in Tibetan Buddhism, in the ancient way, the original school of Nyingma, you had to work through the first level of practice of desire through the sexual practice. At the same time, it opens up a fusion experience of the Shiva and Shakti as one. So it's very powerful for that. But then you still had to go on to work through the last knot, the last granthi, and all this stuff from Tantric Buddhism just comes from India earlier anyway. You had to work through the last knot of anger, the Rudra granthi. Rudra is the form of Shiva. So it was these two last practices were considered like the highest. And then you would get into a stabilized experience of the Mahamudra state, which we also have in Shaivism. Slightly different description, but pretty much the same experience of a contentless experience of pure awareness as an abiding state. It's the highest state that we get to before we start the light body practices in the way of meditation in Trikamasa Yoga. So how important was it? Well, in the old world, it's considered super important. But a lot of that extra emphasis of importance, I think, was created by an emphasis, how can we say it? Well, it was super important, right? But here's what I want to say is that I don't think you lack any level of realization without practicing it, right? I don't think that you do. Do I think it's really powerful? It's a lot of times for whom and when. For me, it was extremely powerful. It really opened my mind. It really got me past attachments. It really got me into a deep state of shunya, all those wonderful things that everything good is founded upon for spiritual work. For me, it was great to learn. And I was sent out by my gurus and advised, sent out to learn different systems of this in India. So it was very helpful for me. I don't think, here's the big issue. I don't think many Westerners are suited for it. One of the reasons it was so powerful in the old world was that it was practiced by Brahmins who are the high literati of the society, who are very much controlling their expression in the world, especially their sexual expression. And it was also practiced by high-level monks and nuns, celibate monks and nuns, who were in Tantric Buddhism. So both of those groups were people that would be hyper facilitated by the thoughts of sexuality, by doing sexuality. I mean, monks and nuns, right? You take ordination at 10 or 11 years old or younger. You're in the monastery for 20 years, 15 years. You finally get through all the Theravada Buddhism. You get into the Mahayana Buddhism. You finally get into Vajrayana Buddhism, and you go into deity yoga practice. And at the peak of the deity yoga practice, they go, okay, now you're going to have sex as a deity, basically. And this is going to be the final experience that brings the bliss and emptiness out fully. So, of course, that's a huge thing for you. You're like, what? You hadn't drunk alcohol your whole life, and you have to have a little bit of alcohol. And you might even consume some of the substances that were considered to be so taboo in Brahmin culture, Buddhist culture. Some menstrual blood, some semen, some urine, some feces. Like you might consume some of this sperm, whatever. You're like, oh my God, depending what school you're in. So understand that was like culturally a very big shock. Be like taking drugs, like taking acid, pretty much, the effect on your consciousness. Because remember, the thing about drugs is the setting is so important, right? So here, the setting for this getting into sexual practice was so important and so powerful. And again, for the tantric householders, even though they're householders and they've had sex, when they're coming from this high Brahmin class, you can't just run around stooping anybody you want. It's got a lot of rules of morality and so on. And if you look at the nature of the rituals and the rules, a lot of times the rules were that the guru and the consort, they tell you who you're going to couple with during that ceremony. So it's like, you don't even know. So that excitement of, I don't even know who I'm going to be with. Oh my God, this is so exciting, right? That doesn't work for us anymore because you can go out to a bar and get laid anytime you want here. So that kind of experience of, I don't know who I'm going to be with is had over and over again by Westerners. So there's no energy there. There's no opening of consciousness through that avenue. Also, then sometimes there was this rule that you had to do it with a certain caste person, like a lower caste person. And it wasn't allowed to be your main partner, like your marriage partner. So that made it hot and sexy and spicy already. So a lot of that's lost for us. It's really no big deal. But even below that, though, the subtler level, there is something to get from this practice. And I'm going to be giving the Mira Consort class online. I'll come on live and do it online for free real soon because a lot of people want to know about it. And, we teach it. So we have to talk about it a bit because people are like, what is this about? And there's a lot of strange ideas about it. I'll even do a question and answer with it if anyone happens to come on live, because we really need to understand it. And we'll announce it. Kendra will put it out on Facebook for you to see, and the website if it's up by then. So there is something to get from the sexual practice, but it's kind of difficult to get in the same place. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We are a psychologized world now, the modern world of people who are practicing Tantra by watching these videos and things like this. That means that we have a lot of psychological baggage, because before we had psychology, we didn't have psychological baggage. It's kind of a weird thing. We created a system to treat us, which created the problems we treat. Because we took God out of the center, we took the sacred nature of life out of the center. After, the Industrial Revolution pretty much started getting underway, we took out religion, basically. No one was interested anymore. It was all about power and money, and that's been going on for the last 400 or 500 years. By the time we got around to 1900, sacredness was fighting for its life to stay in the center of our lives. By the time the First World War happened, it was on the way out. Freud was there saying, this is not the problem. And, the problem is your id and all that kind of stuff. So Freud was there, and psychology came in because religion was going out. We weren't having community ceremonies anymore. We were separating church and state, like in the United States was happening. It's officially legal that they're supposed to be separate. And then you had World War II and further destruction of whatever kind of beauty was in the world as far as a mythical reality, mythic reality running us, informing our lives. And, we became psychologized, and scientism grew, the religion of science and the religion of psychology. And when that happened and the sacred came out of the center, there's nothing left, right? So what happened is we all started to believe this psychology. It became important in our culture. Our culture started growing out of this psychology. Ancient European culture was transforming into a psychologized culture, because the United States was already, and Australia were very much, in Canada, disconnected even more from ancient European culture by virtue of how these three countries developed, New Zealand included, you could say. Then they started to psychologize their culture even faster. Because of that, most of us nowadays feel like we're traumatized by the very slightest thing. The sun melted my ice cream in my ice cream cone. I'm traumatized by that. It's a microaggression on me by the sun. I always used to talk about this because it's really an interesting phenomenon to watch, how we have become so soft that we melt in the sun. Our ancestors would never have survived, and we can only do it because of all these plush surroundings we have. Wait till collapse comes. That's going to be a big reset, right? Because I don't know anybody that I know personally in my sphere who can hunt like me or find water like me or survive like me or who's fit enough like me. I mean, if we had collapse tomorrow, we're going to lose 90% of this planet right away, human beings. And that's not a bad thing. But you'll lose the infrastructure that gives you the electricity, that allows you to do everything you do. So you're going to be back to caveman subsistence right away, immediately. That's not something we want to see, right? But because we've softened so much, because we've lost our connection to nature, because we don't understand what it is to be alive anymore, and because we are out of touch with nature in this way, we have become the center. And when we become the center, our mind turns in on itself, and it becomes its own worst enemy. We don't get that rectification by looking at mountains and going on a 3-day hunt for an elk, and really getting into nature and that spiritual connection to the animal that you're tracking for 3 days, and then look it in the eyes and take it with a bow and arrow and carve it up and get back to your place before the cougars and the pumas and the wolves eat you, carrying it on your back. We just don't have that connection anymore. And then eat that animal that gave its life. And this is not a advertisement for carnivorism. I'm just trying to use some example of how disconnected we are, right? So because of that, our minds dwell inwardly on ridiculous things, and we develop weird conspiracy theories, and we feel like we're traumatized by a subtle wind that goes by our face. And it's unbelievable. I know I'm going on kind of long here, but this is kind of important to understand, because what I'm setting up here is an understanding that we're not psychologically the same people we were even 600-700 years ago in India. We're definitely not. And without that proper psychological base, we can't make use of the sexual practices. at the level that they were taught originally, at the meaning that they had originally. You just think about it for a second. If you were to sit down, if you had any kind of sexual activity in your life, you're not a person who was celibate your whole life. If you had 1 or 2 or 3 boyfriends or girlfriends and you had sex even a dozen of times, you're so, and you grew up in this culture, a psychologized culture, you're so different than the people who were practicing it back then. So you would sit down, let's say right now today, you come to the center here. Let's say if we taught this kind of thing, we don't, but let's say if you did, you come to the center here, the mandala would be made on the floor. You do a ceremony on each other to invoke the deity in each other. And then you start to couple with each other, and then you would have sex, but sex is so ordinary for you. It would be very hard for you to elevate it to the place you're supposed to elevate it to. On top of it, for most of us, most people I know in the culture today, and I'm going to say, for women, I'm going to say, man, 80, 90% of women that I've ever met and they've shared their experience with me verbally, it's really clear that there is a big disconnection sexually. And of course, that's what Neo-tantra is out there trying to heal. That's what they're really doing. It's not a spiritual path per se. It's certainly not real tantra. These people are self-made kooks mostly, honestly. I probably lost half the audience here when I just said that. But when you try to say this is real tantra and this is real sacred and this is real spiritual, let's be serious about it. It's sex therapy. Great sex therapy. Don't get me wrong. I think, if you have problems with this stuff, this is great. But please don't call it tantra. Don't call it my tradition. There's no austerity in this. There's no years of training before you do these ceremonies. People are paying for it on a weekend. And you sit around naked in front of each other doing this on a weekend. So anyway, what I'm saying is if we sat you down to do the ceremony here, put you through the ceremony, revealed the deity in the union, blah, 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 are you going to have this full Shaktipat awakening? Are you going to have this opening of consciousness that you're writing about here? No, I don't think you are, because sex is just too ordinary for us now. And to build it up into something amazing is too difficult. And then to try to do that by combining it with psychedelics, which I see people doing for the ceremonies, is another whole level of difficulty. So traditionally, sexualized meditation was a very important part of tantric practice. Nowadays, here's what I think. It's not something you walk into right away. It's something that has to, you have to be trained into, and we have to let go of a certain understanding of certain ways that it was done in the ancient times that would raise a lot of energy, that made it very exciting, that aren't exciting anymore. No big deal, right? So in the proper context now, the way I would teach it now to the groups going through mirror consort training, so people could use this practice with their marriage partner, I do leave it for the later levels, right? We talk about how to use sexual contact with your marriage partner earlier on in the stages, in the levels of mirror consort training, but it's not this type of ritualized meditational sexuality. It's more for discovering more about yourself sexually, more about learning how to be really intimate with your partner. It's a lot of base work that's extremely important to do. So that's how we contextualize it now. All right. Long answer, short question, but that's what happens. Okay. Now, hopefully that's good. Elodie, I don't know. We can talk about it more when I get there in France for Mind of Shiva training that you're hosting. If everybody hasn't known this in Europe, Elodie is hosting Mind of Shiva training, which is going to be great meditation training for us there. It only takes, I think the hall can only hold 13 people. So get on it. It's almost half full already. So Kat, hello. Do structural abnormalities in the body, such as scoliosis, affect the ability of energy to flow correctly? No. That's a really great question that a lot of people have. No. You can have a shoulder like this. You can be scoliotic. Your energy is, the energy we're talking about. Okay, what kind of energy we should say? Let's start this from scratch. You got physical energy, neurologic energy, very physical, vitality energy. So you have energy of metabolism that's produced in mitochondria in the cell and also in the intracellular fluids. You have energy, you have different energy pathways, right? You have the ones that use oxygen and ones that don't use oxygen. You have energy that flows in the form of neurologic signals, and that can be inhibited a bit by scoliosis. You have the energy of the mind, which flows through all channels of the body and all cells. Now, the energy of mind and consciousness can't technically be diminished by any body problem. You can look at, what was his name in the wheelchair? The physicist who passed away recently? The physicist who passed away recently in the wheelchair from England? Hawking, thanks. Got David Attenborough stuck in my head from talking to somebody the other day. Stephen Hawking? Yeah, he just died recently. He was a great writer, great mind. I mean, he couldn't even move. He was basically like a head in a wheelchair. So he could have meditated into perfect enlightenment, right? So there's nothing that says the way you're deformed is going to hurt you. In fact, I've got one of my favorite texts I'm looking at right over here on the shelf, the Ashtavakra Gita, a very high non-dual text of fruit, pointing out instructions from the Indian tantric yoga tradition. And Ashtavakra was a sage, a famous sage. And as far as we can tell, he probably had a tremendous type of scoliosis, if not ankylosing spondylitis or Maurice Trumpel's disease, where the body is, just bent over progressively until you're bent over all the way into Paschimottanasana and your head's looking up so he might have that, or scoliosis at a really phenomenal lateral curve in the spine, because his name was Ashtavakra, a guy who had all these curves. So no problem there. Okay. So if you have scoliosis, don't worry. Just sit as best you can and comfortable as you can in meditation. No problem. 2, are deciding to have children and a desire for moksha incompatible for most people due to the pull towards bhoga having a child would likely create? Is not wanting to have a child natural part of awakening liberation? Okay. This is a huge question. And I would never, ever step into the arena and offer my head up for this as a sacrificial lamb for women to say, what are you talking about? You're telling us whether we should have kids or not? You're a dude. You have children through your wife, but through your ex-wife, but no, we're not going to listen to you. So, but are deciding to have a children and a desire for moksha incompatible? Okay. Deciding to have a child. Okay. And a desire for moksha. No, they're not incompatible. Let's say why. First of all, let's go to the real examples. Machandanatha and Konkanamba, the great masters that are the icons of essence in human form, the Mahasiddha form, for Trika Mahasiddha yoga, they had 12 children, right? Obviously no condoms around in those days, lots of sexual practice. Oops, went wrong. 12 children, right? And 6 became lineage holders, of which we are one lineage, one branch. So, there are multiple examples of this. And, even major Tibetan monks that people think are monks, like celibate monks, like Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche. People hear about Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche as the Dzogchen master of the Dalai Lama, which he was before he passed away. Dalai Lama still reveres him as his main guru this way. But, you look at him, he's in the robes all the time. You never see him with his family. And most people didn't even know that he was married and had a whole bunch of daughters. Right. One of my teachers used to take his daughters shopping all the time in San Francisco to spend the free Tibet money that they were given, sad to say, in the department stores, just to, keep him busy. So he was able to teach. So there are a lot of high level masters, female masters, as well as male teachers who came from family situations. The female masters obviously themselves had the babies, as well as ones who did not, as well as ones who, when they became realized or on the way to realization, they became so sort of complete inside, they felt like, okay, this is no longer part of my nadi as a woman, and my biology has been completed. And I want to spend all the energy, all the time that I would spend having to take care of a child, raise a child, give my own body energy. For 10 months, the child eats your blood, right? So give all that energy and so forth to a child, then the breastfeeding later, and then the raising, and then the headaches when they do wrong and so on, and you suffer emotionally with it. They said, rather pour that into my realization and to benefit all beings. So some women go that route. That's understandable. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing. Some women go the route of, no, part of my nadi is to have children. And that's going to help me with my liberation, because it's going to help me with detachment, or it's going to help me, whatever you think. So it's not mutually exclusive, the desire for children and not, but you really want to find out the motive. And that's why I waited a long time to have children. I wanted them all my life, but I waited a really long time because I wanted to know my motive. and this is the sad part of it, is that in my counseling sessions I've done with couples and women over the years, in my role as a therapist I did a long time ago in Australia, women would say to me, I want to have a child because I want someone to love me. And they would say that straight up because they're not spiritual practitioners. They don't hear the pathology in that, or psychologists. They don't hear the pathology in that. I want to have a child so someone will love me. I want to have a child so I'll have something to love. Weird, right? And some people, old world type people, I want to have kids because, who's going to take care of me when I'm old? All right, practical reason, not bad. A little better. It's a lot better than the other two reasons, which are kind of really showing some kind of emotional mental deficit. But you really got to know deep down, are you being driven by your ancestral force, by the karma of your ancestors that you got to carry on? The name has to carry on. Does it have to carry on? Does it? Is that really why we should have children? Do you really need kids to take care of you when you're older these days? I don't know. Are you in a spiritual community where that won't be a necessity? An extended family where that won't be a necessity? So do you have a lot of money where it won't be a necessity? If money still matters, because after collapse, money won't matter. So it's a very interesting question. Is not wanting to have a child a natural part of awakening or liberation? We can't make that blanket rule that along the path, somewhere along the way, a woman's going to go, oh, I don't want to have children. And that's what happens in the spiritual path. In the spiritual path, there comes a point where you don't want to have children. I don't think we can say that. Though I have heard women say, having just a few days ago, in fact, a woman said to me, having known now, if I knew then what I know now and all what I went through to have a child, if I was going to make that choice now, I wouldn't do it. So that's, but hindsight is 20/20, right? So we can't really say. That's two big questions so far. Maybe the other ones will be shorter. Are deciding to have children, okay. Are there specific practices that can help with the pedestallation of a teacher? Are there practices that can help? I think you mean not having a teacher on a pedestal, or do you mean with putting them on a pedestal? I'm kind of confused. If you're live now, can you send that in real quick to Sukalia, who's taking the chat messages and sending them to me here, feeding them to me? Are there specific practices that can help with pedestallation of teachers? I don't know the term. So let's deal with putting teachers on a pedestal as a bad thing before we do a good thing. Like I said earlier, we're psycho-emotional beings now. We're psychologized. So we have an ability to be abused very easily because we have this psychology that we think can be abused. We take everything very personal, and so on and so on. So we're kind of weak when it comes to our psychology based on how we've structured our society over the past 200-300 years, especially. So, putting teachers on a pedestal has some negative effects for people who are immature. In the ancient times, if your psychology is immature, the whole community saw teachers in a certain way, and then you had a way of seeing them in that way. And even if you were still developing your psychology, the cultural view on teachers and the abundance of them, the normalcy of it in society, and the checks and balances on the teachers themselves in society created a non-issue. Pedestalization was a non-issue. Putting them on a pedestal was normal. We did that because they were the authorities on our spiritual tradition, and we wanted to learn from them. And that was fine. So a healthy, strong ego structure, a person who has what we call in our tradition basic sanity, is suited to work with a teacher and see them as an icon of essence. Like over my shoulder right here is my great Lama. And every day I pray with him. Every day I see him as my icon of essence, and I'm able to do that because he can't abuse me. Not that he ever would, but even if he did, I wouldn't feel it as abuse because I'm not abusable. I'm hurtable. You could hurt me. You could hit me with a baseball bat. You could say mean things, but I'm not abusable because that takes a victim consciousness. That takes a feeling that you're so fragile that your own essential nature can be damaged by somebody else. Now, that's not wrong. That's just stages of development. So people in stage 1, 2, 3, they kind of have the ability to be abused. So I don't think it's good for people that are going through in 12-stage view terms, stage 1, 2, and 3, to take on a teacher, to have a personal relationship with a teacher. Certainly not to have sex with a teacher. Certainly not to get into debate or argument with a teacher, because you'll misunderstand them or think they're being mean and attacking you. Certainly not even to go hang out and watch TV with them, because you'll see them in their normal mode and you'll go, oh, they're not realized, because you think realized is like some angel flying around. So when a person doesn't have a certain level of development, putting them on a pedestal is dangerous. So it's more about the student knowing what level they're at. And a teacher should know too, and not allow a student to get closer unless they have a very high level of realization, stabilization, what we call basic sanity already. Many teachers, young teachers like myself and others, when we were out there when we were young, our teachers told us, just teach everybody, like a compassionate thing. Teach everybody that comes. So I was teaching everybody that comes, highest level stuff. Not spending enough years on the foundation practices, I think, emphasizing that. Not boring people to tears, which I should have done. And I think that creates problems. Then the student, because they're in an immature space, they haven't like really healed all their mommy daddy issues, they project that onto a teacher. And then there's the sycophantic student, which a sycophant student, if you don't know the term, is, in English, this term means someone who comes and feigns devotion, like fakes devotion and shows devotion and love and service and so forth to an authority figure, a teacher in this case, but they have their own strategy. They have their own thing they want to get back. They're doing it to get something back, not doing it out of pure devotion and pure unconditional love for the Dharma coming to them through a vehicle of the teacher as an icon of essence. And because of that, they may get what they want and move on, or they may not get what they want and get very jaded, very angry, and become a hater. So it's very much about the motive of the student as to whether the teacher goes on the pedestal or not. There's no practices for it. Like Chogyam Trungpa was a pretty realized Tibetan Buddhist monk who left the monk stuff. He just realized, had a big realization. I don't want to be a monk anymore. I want to reach people where they're at in the lay person world. Got married to a 15-year-old British girl, smuggled her out of the country to America. It's like a crazy story. And she was willing, she was complicit, but she was 15. And started this kind of huge teaching movement. And in Boulder, Colorado, mostly. He was in other places too, but that became their kind of headquarters. Naropa Institute came out of it. You heard of that probably. And Naropa University now, I think it's called. And he thought, here's the way for me to get off the pedestal. Students are going to put me on a pedestal no matter what I do. So here's the way for me to get off the pedestal. I'm going to hang out with them out of my monk robes. So he started wearing flannel shirts and cowboy hats and jeans and boots and stuff. That was his cowboy era. First, he was wearing suits tailored in London before he went over to the States. So he left all the robes and thought, I'll dress like everybody else. And taking away the uniform will make us feel like comrades, peer group. It didn't work enough. It worked with some, but then he would eat with them. He would live with them. He would party with them. He got into drinking big time, and really, because they were taking acid and mushrooms and partying. It was a hippie era. It was 60s after all. So he thought, okay, if this is what they do, I'm going to do it with them. And he got into drinking and became very much an alcoholic, actually. And that's what killed him in the end, which is kind of interesting at a young age. But he thought, I'm going to get in the trenches with these people, even to the point where he was in bed with them every night after the party. It was not unusual to see 3 to 6 or 7 people in bed with Chogyam Trungpa in the morning, all hungover, all naked, having had sex with everybody all night long. And then, whatever. And this was his idea, that it would get him off the pedestal, that it would create a community of peer practitioners. They would get rid of the false mysticism that is projected onto teachers, onto spiritual practice. And everybody had this level playing field, and then we could all rise together. This was his idea. And it didn't work. It looked like it was working because everybody was engaging with him very much in this level. He was giving great teachings, great practice retreats. People were coming. There seemed to be lots of people. But in the end, it didn't really work during his lifetime. You can see there was no great development during his lifetime. Some of his students that were very sincere continued the practice after he died. They became very realized. That's true. But Anyway, it created a huge scandal. And every teacher who sincerely tries to get in the trenches with the students, these days, same thing happens. But of course, it's hard for the students or outside observers to tell who has a pure motive as a teacher of getting in the trenches with the student, partying with them, having sex with them, working with them, doing business together with it, whatever it is. Who has a pure motive in doing that to try to de-pedestalize the teacher, and who is doing it because they're whacked in the head, or maybe they're just trying to take advantage of people or whatever. This is the hard part. So there's no practices per se to help with that, Kat. There's just view teachings, really good view teachings, and really finding a teacher who will not give teachings out of the proper sequence. That was my biggest flaw when I first started teaching. My original teachers were very like direct realization tantra, boom. Then I got my ceremony, graduated as Acharya after 10 years of training. Go out and teach. What should I teach? Teach your experience. How? Any way you feel is right, But it was not a great advice. And this Lama here gave me wonderful advice when I first went to see him. I said, now I'm practicing Dzogchen with you. I've been learning Dzogchen from other teachers for like 10 years. Let me see, those only 7, a little bit more, like 13 years. And I said, but I want to take refuge with you. I feel I have the karma with you. You're my guy. And so we did a big refuge ceremony in his shrine of his house, or his, whatever you call it, in the temple complex where he lived, his complex within the temple. We did a big ceremony there, 8 monks, 4 chanting, 4 doing music, and the tormas and the whole thing. And I was initiated and given a name and taken refuge and a practice and so on. And then I said, okay. So when I went to meet him after doing that practice in the retreat a bit, I came out and I talked to him and I said, so I'd really love an assessment. So he had me describe all over again, which I did before he accepted me, all the training I had, how I was teaching, what was going on, what went well, what didn't go well, et cetera. And he said, look, I think the only real big thing I see in your pedagogy is that you're just teaching too much, too soon, too advanced. You have to let people work through it, and you have to use your discrimination about better use your discrimination about what level these students are at. And I wasn't using that. He was right? So I was just hearing what people said they wanted to learn, and I felt like, well, they must be speaking the truth. They're spiritual type people. Let me give them what they want to learn. This was wrong. So pedestalization, putting people on pedestals is really interesting. It's a big dynamic between the teacher and student, responsibility on both sides, okay? But there's not much I can help with it for practices except having the proper view. And the view is get teachings when they're appropriate for you. Find a teacher who knows when they're appropriate for you. That's really important. And that's what I feel I've spent the last 20 years trying to figure out. And finally, we have a good formula for that. Let's see. And if I didn't answer what you were asking, because it's kind of hard for me to understand your question, just feel free to shoot a question to clarify for me. Number 4, does palliative care, that is the use of morphine and heavy sedatives, affect a person's death from a spiritual perspective? If so, how? Death teachings and death practices are a big thing for us in our tradition. Here's a general rule. If you're a spiritual practitioner, you want to go out with clarity of mind. Drugs can affect your channels, therefore affecting your mind. And the effect of the mind at death is extremely important to what happens after. So there are 2 factors that come up at death to dictate what your journey in the after-death state will be like. Rapid, long, taking rebirth again in one of the 6 realms of suffering and delusion, or shooting out to a higher level like a Siddha Loka, taking birth in a Siddha Loka or something. Can I adjust this? This is okay, right? Is that okay? I want to sit up straighter. So taking birth in a Siddha Loka, or direct realization all the way, getting realized. So here's how it goes. If you're a practitioner, you want to stay as clear as you can. You want to stay in your situation as best you can. So if pain is there, this is why I think dealing with pain during your life is so crucial. People probably will think I'm nuts, but if I get my teeth worked on, I don't use anesthetic. It's just stay real, feel it. I had an operation in my lower abdomen, and after the operation, they tried to give me morphine. I said no. They tried to give me pill painkillers. I said no. So I refused all painkillers, and it hurt, but I wanted to know what that felt like, and I wanted to deal with it, because how did I know how I was going to die? We never know how we're going to die. So if my mind is able to stay in equanimity during that kind of pain, and my mind is able to stay in equanimity and not be seduced by sexual attractions, people coming on to me, or greed for money or power or fame, these things that take us down, we're going to be great in the after death states. We're going to navigate it really well if we've received the death teachings. But if you're a spiritual practitioner and you have a tremendous amount of pain and you can't quite deal with it, and the pain is becoming a real distraction to the practice of dying, then it might be smart that you take a little bit of something to take the edge off so you can regain your composure and you can work with the pain as the meditation. But if the pain is so much it's making you lose your mind, it's not going to really work. So it's a judgment call there, right? For a person who is not a hardcore spiritual practitioner, meditator, yogin, I don't think we should get really involved with their lives, telling them, oh, you don't want to ruin the experience of dying. You want to feel all your pain, because I don't really want my mom to go out in the super amount of pain. I wanted her to be smooth in her mind. So when she went out, she could, hear my instructions and try to make the best of her death experience. If she was distracted by pain, it would just put her right in the hell realm, maybe. So it's a for whom and when situation. And it's very good to come and get the dream yogas of dream, sleep, and death every year, or every 3 or 4 years or so, to tune up with it. But I think at least once in your life, it's very important to get yogas of dream, sleep, and death teachings to learn what the death process is, how to work with it, and so on. I think this year we gave more time, didn't we? We gave 10 days for it, right? So we gave 10 days for it this year in 2021 schedule, because I haven't been able to go into the death part in enough detail in the past few years. We've been doing it for 5, 6, 7 days. So I had 3 more days so we can really get into the death aspect of that training this year in 2021. Okay. Hope that helps, Kat. Donald, in yoga, what is a virus? Don't know. In yoga, I don't know what yoga thinks of a virus, because they didn't know what viruses were, right? In Ayurveda, we know what a virus is. It's a pathogen. There's a list of little critters that can make you sick. And they didn't see bacteria or viruses with microscopes. They didn't have any, but they knew about pathogens back then and infectious disease and so on. Number 2, I can't get into a good Uttanasana or Paschimottanasana. Too much stiffness in the pelvis and lower back. Any tips to loosen this up? Yeah. It's not considered efficacious or wise to start with static asana if you're very stiff already, meaning holding a posture that's just static. It is much wiser to start with what we call the wind series and the water series of yoga. See, traditional yoga, you had to do preparatory practices before you did static postures that were held for very long times, not flow, not this flow yoga that goes on today. So when we teach Way of Fire, Trikomasana Yoga, this is traditional Kundalini Hatha Yoga. And some people might have come to this tradition with some stiffness. So, but regardless, whoever we are, even if we're not stiff, the first series that we do is a wind series to reduce the wind in the channels and the wind in the mind. Nothing good is going to happen with excess wind running around through your channels and your mind. So you do the wind series first. Now, that alone tends to loosen us up a lot, because wind, excess wind, erratic wind is known to make us stiff, right? And amongst other symptoms. And then I recommend, of course, doing the fire series is great. That's the second series we teach in this series of preparatory practices for yoga. But it's not necessary for the stiffness too much, unless the stiffness is coming from something called ama, or undigested food in the channels and the tissues. And therefore, doing the fire series can help to burn that out of the tissues, and you get loose as well. But it is important to do the wind series and the water series. The water series are a bunch of like pose, counterpose movements that have strong breath, strong movement, and they pry everything open. They melt these earth, water, heavy bonds we have in our body, and it just flows. So it works a lot more with our fascia and our ligaments and tendons like this than just muscles. And the nature of it being moving makes it a lot less frustrating for the beginner who's really stiff, because at least you feel like you're moving and something's happening. You can feel it happening. And there'll be a lot faster progress of opening up for flexibility if you start with the wind series and the water series first. As soon as we can get this website up online, then we can, we're still waiting for the approval with the bank here in Costa Rica. Then we will put up Kundalini Hatha Yoga, Way of Fire, level 1 for free. Everyone can learn about it because everyone should have it. So we'll put that up online, and Donald, then you can do it there. If you want to learn and ask like a way of doing it that's very close to doing it, it comes from Satyananda, who brought this yoga out to the world. And I know that his BSY schools have branches in Ireland where you are and in Europe. It's possible to learn what are called Pavana Muktasana 1, 2, and 3. These series, these are the water, wind, fire, and water series. And, they're a little bit different version than ours, but 80% the same. It's just that I learned more of the movements in it, more of the reasons of how they work Ayurvedically, spiritually, and so on, because I had one-to-one training with my teachers. I did not train in Bihar School of Yoga. I trained with the heads of the Bihar School of Yoga one-to-one, and some of their great students that they had one-to-one as well, who are now quite old and some deceased. Okay. So then if you do that, you'll get into Uttanasana, Paschimottanasana like a champ. No problem. Number 3. In Swami Satyananda's bio, it says he attained Mahasamadi, a yogic accomplishment of discarding the body at will to become one with universal consciousness. My question is, A, what does this actually mean? And B, how can we get there living in Western industrial society? That is the goal of our school for everybody who's in normal Western industrial society. It's the goal to have a death that is in equanimity, under your conscious control, not having chaos and emotion and fear and so forth. That's the highest goal we can have for the lay practitioner. And if we have that goal, then we're going to be so much better at going through the after-death states, and we're going to be able to transition to a better rebirth in a higher realm. Maybe get fully realized, who knows, depending on your aptitude. But the question you asked about it was, what does it actually mean? Mahasamadi, why do we call a yogin's death Mahasamadi? Well, in general, that's a term used for everyone who dies who is spiritual, but it really is a specific term, the great samadhi, the great meditational state. Well, in Tibetan, it's like tukpa, they call it. So it's the same thing. You know you're going to die. When you reach a certain level of spiritual attainment, you know you're dying. You know how many days or weeks or months and even hours or whatever, right down to the moment. Satyananda, my first guru, he knew he was going to die. He called up all the disciples the day before and said, I'm going to die tomorrow night. The ones who were local in India, he said, get over here, the high-ranking ones. I want to teach you something before I go. So he taught them a little bit, had a little talk with them. And he said, I've looked at astrologically. This is a good time to go. So he's choosing to go. I'm going to go now. So he pulls up into Lotus. He sits there and he says, bye. Boom. He sees the clock. Boom. Bye. He goes. This is a yogic death, a death that sounds extraordinary to us, but is really quite attainable by anybody who does train their mind in the spiritual traditions and understands the death yoga teachings. So that's the goal for lay practitioners. So it's definitely accomplishable. It's something that we're shooting for, actually, and something I would hope that most of the practitioners of Trika Mahasaya Yoga will attain, because death is considered one of the 4 great moments where we can attain liberation in a quite natural way. One is every morning when you wake up. One is when you go to sleep. One is when you orgasm, and one is when you die. So Tantra traditionally teaches these 4 moments of possibility of spontaneous awakening into our true nature and full liberation. So death is going to happen to all of us, and we get to prepare a lot for it if we're in the right mode. So that's fantastic. Yov, I think I'm saying your name right. I hope Yov. In the book Measuring Meditation by William Baudry, a student of Master Nan Huai Chin, he mentions 2 rainbow body attainments, rainbow body and rainbow body of great transformation. He refers to it as a process of dissolution of the body that leaves no gross form, and it's called a rainbow body due to the appearance of tents, arches, and circles of rainbow light. He says that it is simply a way of dissolving the body, a relatively low-level attainment in the level of the first skandha of form, and not a transformation of the body into a light body. Is it in alignment with TMY view? No, it's not. And I'm wondering if the translation is correct. I really wonder. So to say that conscious dissolution of your elements that hold your body together at the moment of death, yielding a rainbow light body. And that's not full attainment, that it's a low level attainment. I don't know anybody in any tradition of Indian or Buddhist Tantra or Taoism from China who would agree. Nobody would agree. Nobody. I'll tell you, nobody. So I don't know. Hopefully it's a wrong translation. Chan Buddhism, I think this guy was from Chan, right? Chan Buddhism, usually understands this kind of stuff, though they don't go for it. Sometimes, if you don't know how to get a rainbow body, oftentimes you'll put it down. The scholar Chris Wallace was having a debate with me, and he took our system of the 12-stage view, modified it a bit the way he wanted to, took out 2 of the stages, 11 and 12, and said it's 1 through 10. So he destroyed the system, basically. And what stages did he take out? The stages of the light body. And I asked him, why would you do that? Oh, because I think this light body thing is a figment of your imagination. It's something you've made up. I said, I made it up, really. It's been going on for a few thousand years, recorded by yogins everywhere, still going on. I still publish regularly photos. Every time I'm sent photos by someone who attains light body, I publish them on the Facebook group so everybody can get inspiration. It's not a figment of my imagination. And what I find really strange is that Christopher Wallace says that Abhinavagupta is his main inspiration in Tantra. And Abhinavagupta is said to have rainbow light bodied with 1,200 disciples in a cave in Kashmir. Now you could say, well, that's just a story because no one can, affirm it. True. But we have people that are rainbow light bodying now. My main inspiration underneath my Lama is another Lama who rainbow light bodied in 1935. He's considered like the second great Buddha of Buddhism in Tibet because, of Tantric Buddhism, and even though he's a Bumpo, because he was such a powerful rainbow light body master. Like Padmasambhava was said to be as well for the Nyingma. So rainbow light body is going on all the time. It's a very high state. It takes a lot of very clear practice. It's not about getting stuck in a form level of practice. It's not subject-object based. If you have subject-object mind, you cannot rainbow body. If you have non-dual mind and you're still stuck in any kind of attachment to the body, you cannot rainbow body. So the rainbow body is preserved best today in the Dzogchen tradition, which is the highest level that we teach through Trikamasiddha Yoga. And, it's got 4 levels of a rainbow body, 4 levels of light body practice. So no, I can't agree with this statement at all. And I'm just going to leave it. Whatever a light body means in Nanhuai Chin's tradition, great. I don't have a problem with it. Let him teach it. It's beautiful, whatever. I have no idea. I have nothing to say of any value about it because it's not my tradition. But is it TMY? That's what you asked. Is it in alignment with TMY? Absolutely not. This I would debate the person from a TMY perspective because I don't think it's correct. Okay, number 2. In many traditions, I saw the notion that spiritual development involves attainment of higher bodies, each corresponding to a different dimension in the various cosmological systems. When attained, they then become the main vehicle for that being, while each one has a much longer lifespan. For example, the Sukshma Deha, or Yin Shen body, etc. How does TMY look at the subject? TMY says that at every single stage of the 12-stage view, your body is a little bit different. You're not really going to notice that until stage 8 or 9, but it is happening progressively all the way along, albeit not so great until you hit stage 7 or 8 really. So in stage 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, your body is re-experienced at each stage in a very different way and has very different capacities all the way until you can just dissolve it into rainbow light in stage 12. So there is some understanding of that same idea in Trikamasiddha Yoga. My Hawaiian kahuna master that I studied with also said there are 7 levels of expression of DNA, and humans are only touching like the 1st or 2nd level of expression. It can go much deeper, much more expansive and powerful. So the idea of these different bodies exists in TMY and many other systems, like you say here. We don't go into it too much, so we don't really talk about trying to attain another kind of body, has these new capacities. It gets very spiritual materialistic very quickly. We're all trying to become then like a Superman or a Superwoman. And I don't even want to think about it. It's not worth it. It's not an important part of our system. I never heard it stressed by any of my masters. It's just like, yeah, your body's different at each stage, and here's some of the capacities. Simple. Patrick, hello, Patrick. If we have the opportunity to consciously confront ourselves with the fundamental fear of death or its close manifestations, how can we tell if, when this is an opportunity we should take? Are there golden opportunities to force the issue of surrender, so to speak? Yeah, maybe. Like, I don't really know what you're saying here. If you're saying something scary, like, should I go stand, on the very tip of a steeple of a church with one toe and get scared by the wind, blow me off to kill me, I'd say maybe that's not a good idea. But I think meditating on death and contemplating it can be scary enough. But I did benefit from doing practice in the cremation grounds for sure. Before that, I was a healthcare professional, and in my schooling, I had to dissect, I don't know how many bodies, maybe 30, 40 bodies I dissected. And then I also have the karma, I don't know why, maybe because I'm a yogin, and I worked on the Munchara practices a lot in retreats. I had the karma of coming upon people who were just killed quite often in accidents and gunfights or car accidents or whatever in the streets and things. And so I've seen a lot of dead people there, people dying, been with them in transition. So that helped too. So I think there's ways of putting ourselves in there. One of the ways to deal with it is to do hospice work. There you're doing great merit to others, and you're still, getting confronted with the experience of death every single day. You're getting real about it. Hospice work might be the modern way of doing cremation ground training. If so, is there a way to tell whether the desire to take these opportunities is genuinely beneficial rather than evidence of some deep conditioning about, for example, the necessity of suffering? So if you're saying you want to sort out whether giving yourself some austere kind of practice, like looking at death or whatever, is a way of just feeding into your self-hatred system, that you're attached to that. You have a demon realm kind of fixation a little bit, not so strong, but a little bit floating around in there. And you want to know whether it's this or that. You have to just do discrimination practice to tell. There's no way anybody could tell you. So there's no way to tell whether this desire to take the opportunity is coming from a pure or impure motive. That's all you. Pure motive is so important. It really is. It has to be emphasized. This is one of the things that I'm happy that Christopher Wallace took from our system into his way he teaches. I heard he emphasizes pure motive all the time. But pure motive is not something you find once and you let it go. And pure motive is not a lecture. It's not a teaching that you give as part of a tantric path. Pure motive is something real that has to be visited regularly, that you have to examine your conscience about on a daily basis. So don't let it be some kind of object of a lecture in your mind. Find your pure motive. That goes for everything, especially this question. All the questions of, am I fooling myself? What stage am I at? Am I fooling myself especially? Am I fooling myself? Am I having ego here? Or is this really from what I really want to do? Or, from the deepest level of my nadi to benefit beings? This is all contemplation, discovering pure motive. And we have to come into confrontation with our mind, with our selfishness. There's I'm really getting down on this month. There is no have your cake and eat it too in tantric yoga or dzogchen. It's total BS. All right. So all you guys listening in Europe who've been writing to me about having your cake and eating it too, that tantra is the path of boga cha moksha, pleasure and liberation. Phooey. Pleasure should come to you. You should self-accept. You should love yourself. You should treat yourself well and give yourself cookies and do all that kind of stuff up until the end of stage 3, right? From stage 2 and stage 3, you've got to treat yourself well. You've got to take more of that path of bhoga with moksha, pleasure with liberation, right? Because in stage 2 and 3, you're not really going hardcore for liberation. You really aren't. You got to be honest with yourself. Once you hit stage 4, you're in that transition place. When you hit stage 5, now you're going hardcore. You have to give yourself austerities. You have to start cutting off all these attachments. You have to start cutting off all these self-image formations. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't develop detachment to pleasure while you're trying to grab all the pleasure in the lower stages in 1, 2, and 3, and 4. It's not possible. I would say even in 5. I would say people today, the trend is to not approach real austerity, real tapas. People are afraid of tapas, afraid of austerity. They think it's anti-tantra. They misunderstand the tantric training completely. You have to have control of yourself. You have to be purified of desires for the dualistic world of subject-object desire. That only comes by moving through stage 7. After stage 7, somebody can say, Boga cha moksha, look at me, I'm having pleasure and I'm detached. Yeah, good for you. You're after stage 7, right? But even then, you're still looking to see, am I going to get attached? Am I going to stimulate new attachments? But if you're after stage 7, you're deeply ingrained in the view of non-duality of your own nature. And then, actually, there's not such a big attraction to pleasure anyway. It just dies away anyway, because that's part of your subject-object attachment field. It's part of being immature. It's part of being childish and immature, chasing lust. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying being childish and immature is bad. My children are childish and immature. They're children. They should act like that. It's bad when adults act like that, right? It's bad when spiritual practitioners rationalize it and make excuses to act like that, right? But if you're an adult and you're just waking up and you're going into stage 2 and 3, feed yourself some goodies. Yeah. Stage 2, you do kind of cut things off because you watched yourself be out of control. But in stage 3, you have to feed back the pleasures of life, the niceties of life, and not have it disturb whatever equanimity you've developed so far. That kind of is important, I think. But after that initial phase of self-acceptance in stage 3, after the harsh austerities of stage 2, where you're really starting to say no to everything for the very first time. You're not a hedonist out of control for the first time. You're waking up to your appropriate appetites. Stage 3, you establish your appropriate appetites. You know how much sex you need. You know how much food you need. You know how much sleep you need, this kind of thing. You know how much entertainment you need to relax the tension on your mind. And you give it that, and that's fine. Then you go through 4 as like a transition. And in 5, you start to lay it down and go, now that was good. And I'm psychologically whole now. I'm not a adult child, which are so many adult children running around. I'm a strong human being. I know my inner strength. I've touched my essence a little bit, but I'm not self-recognized yet. It's not established yet. So I'm going to now apply the austerities. I'm now going to use the discrimination, and I'm going to get into the shunya and break open those last bit of attachments, stage 5, 6, 7. Use my wisdom of discrimination and practices to drop my last bit of attachments, okay? Okay, long story. Next, Anuk. All is consciousness. Then what is the difference between being non-sentient and sentient being? Between being and sentient being. Okay. All is consciousness. What is the difference between being and sentient being? In our tradition from TNY, every living creature has some level of sentient nature. Some level of sentient nature. So, we're discovering this in biology all the time now, that more and more we're finding so many animals that have some ability to be self-aware. It's really amazing. What's that name of that octopus movie you just watched? Suki. What's the name of the octopus movie you just watched? Octopus, My Teacher on Netflix, something like that. A really cool movie showing just how aware octopus are, or octopi, I guess. We know that ravens are and certain other animals. It's really interesting to see the levels of self-awareness that are in the animal world. So from a TMY perspective, this term of sentient being means a being who's aware. And in the old days, it was, pretty much reserved for humans and a few animals that were thought to be occupied by human spirits for that birth. But we really don't have a scriptural or oral teaching standard for what they're discovering now. That so many animals that we thought weren't really sentient are sentient. And that to harm them is torture and bad, bad karmically. So it's all shifting a little bit. So these definitions are shifting. So your next part of your question was, I'm puzzled as the only explanation I can come up is that there is manifested consciousness with and without self-awareness. Right, this is what I'm talking about. There's a scale of self-awareness. Biologists are working on this scale. I worked out a scale of self-awareness for tricha psychology about 20 years ago, and now biologists are working on the same scale. How aware of your own situation are you? Some animals can't feel pain. You could tear the leg off and they don't feel any pain at all. I go, oh, geez, my leg is gone. I have to hobble around on 5 legs now instead of 6, or 7 legs instead of 8. And there's animals where, yeah, you can like pull their head right off. They feel no pain. It's quite strange. But there's animals where their nervous system responds in a different way, and they're very small animals. Like we would think of them as simple animals, and they recoil with pain. They show more of this awareness, self-awareness through pain. Anyway, biologists are working on a scale of this, and it's kind of interesting to see what they come up with. There is kind of some let's say consciousness over here with no awareness, self-awareness, and then consciousness with self-awareness, and a continuum in between. That might be the truth of how it is for living beings. You say in your question here, but it is said that this consciousness is reflexive in self-awareness, implying that all consciousness is self-aware by its nature. So how can there be anything non-sentient, assuming that self-awareness is analog with sentience? Okay. The nature of the awareness, of the primal awareness that we all are, that we're going to be abiding in, we're an enlightened being like this gentleman right here, the white fellow floating in space above us. When we are that nature of that awareness, the pure nature of it is pure awareness and aware of itself. And it's completely aware of itself. There's no unknown aspects to it. There's no movement between subject and object because it isn't there. It's pure awareness, which is innately, completely self-aware. Okay. That is in every sentient being. You say this question, but how could that be? Because then every sentient being would know their nature. No, it's not true. Look at humans. It's in us, and we don't know our nature. We don't know it. It's there, but we don't know it. We have to realize it through the practice. That's the whole point of the path and the practice. So, yeah. Can animals be realized, maybe is the question. I don't know. I have my own thoughts about it. I've shared them in the past. It's my opinion, but anyway. You say, I ask this because I have a problem envisioning all sentient beings. It's a tough question. I think as soon as a being is sentient, there's awareness, potentiality there. Whether that being has the ability to have that self-reflective or reflexive moment, pratyabhijna, or realizing your essential nature, if they have the ability to have that moment come up in their consciousness, that is what I think masters are mostly saying sentient being refers to. If you're not able to experience this reflexive experience of awareness within itself as one non-dual experience, then I think that's what they're saying non-sentient being. Like you could be alive. There takes some consciousness to be alive, but you can't recognize your own being. You don't know. You're not aware that you're aware. You're not aware that you're alive. Are you aware that you're alive? For a being that's not aware if they're alive, dying is no big deal, and having them for our food source wouldn't be immoral. But if a being is aware that they're alive and we're taking that life to that's where they get on this question about vegetarianism or not. So I think this is how sentient being was applied. Okay. Who's this one? Next question. We're getting through them, almost at the end. Wow. Then we can take some more live stuff, maybe. Ben, as I'm diligently progressing down the TMY path, I try to approach each technique from a beginner's mind standpoint. That's good. That means not overanalyzing experiences felt, visualized, tasted, etc., with past acquired knowledge. Excellent. Good for you. You're coming fresh and new, cleaning your palate, and you're trying to be really fresh in your experience. So far, this has worked out magically. Good to hear it. So far. I delved deep into a book you recommended to me once, The Doctrine of Vibration by Mark Dyczkowski. The perspectives and insights gained through that book and others were rather transformational. Great. In my personal view. Excellent. And especially the structural integration fascia work that I do. I think that you do. I love that book. I love Mark's work. I think Mark is a really good voice for the Shaiva tradition. Possibly the best voice for the Shaiva tradition out there right now, because he doesn't pontificate. He doesn't put himself up there as a big fat guru. He didn't create a new spiritual school and start an ashram. And, he teaches. Some students go to learn from him. Some students feel like he's their teacher, but he doesn't make a big deal out of it. And he had real contact with real practitioners over the years. So I think his intellectual, scholarly take on things is really great. And you can get a lot from his books. Okay. And then you had these insights from the book that helped you with understanding the fascia work you do, which is cool. Now to your question, as you say. In one of your lectures, you mentioned that we should not overthink things as often many Indian teachers do, as in breaking things down into named parts, or to have almost two epistemological, be almost too epistemologically oriented. Let me fix it for you. How do I know what I know? Because in no approach. How do I know what I know? Because in no approach, and try stay more holistic. English is hurting on this one. How do I know what I know? Because in no approach, and stay more holistic. Okay. I would still love to. Okay. So I think you're saying, how do I get not stuck in a human realm of analyzing, using discursive knowledge to categorize and name, etc., but still use my knowing awareness? Is that what you mean? And I think that's a good question, because we don't have to exert our intellect, our awareness, our soft, expansive situational awareness, which can fold back into knowing that you're aware. You can look back into your own nature in that space. Doesn't need any intellect to make it work. And you don't need your intellect constantly pounding all day long to get through your life, to do your life. If you have a job where you're like a stocks analyst, okay, 8-10 hours a day or night, whatever, you're looking at the stocks trading and you're analyzing it, you're doing all that kind of stuff. That's a lot of heavy brain work. It's hard for those people. I know, hard for them to wind down. That's why so much drugs and hookers and stuff and partying. How do they go to sleep after? How do they meditate? So it's really difficult when you have a job that stimulates your mind so strongly. When you're like a research scholar writing books all the time, you have your PhD and you're just writing more and more books and you're giving teachings all the time and you're translating, your brain is working overtime. It's very hard to get the inner wind to calm down and relax enough to meditate well, to get real experience. But the truth is, we don't need all of that constant movement of our mind channel to live life. We overdo it, right? So we just want to remain in that self-awareness as much as possible. There's no real method to it, but to do it, basically. I'd love to hear your take on where you would slot the detailed beauty of the Spanda philosophy within TMY, and anthropologically, how much of it, or if any idea, made it from Udayana into Tibet. Yeah, well, I think the Spanda theory is a huge part of TMY, but that's philosophy. And then the way that the Spanda theory comes to life in your life is through the path, through the 12 stages, through all the practices, through the oral teachings especially, right? That's what I really think. It's popular nowadays. I don't want to name names, it's popular nowadays for people to not have a guru, not do proper training, not have done retreats, really have no practice. And to basically bullshit people that they have a practice. I mean, I see this all the time. It's really sad. I know certain people, I know they never practice. And then students write to me of theirs and saying, oh, but he's a great practitioner. I'm like, ugh, I have to bite my, but it's straight up BS. The person isn't a great practitioner, never had a great practice. Everyone that knows them knows that, right? Pause. Okay. We're back. So this is where it breaks down. Like the Spanda Karika, great text, and the Vritti on it, the commentary on it's a great text as well. But how do you then apply it? That's the practice. That's the path. It makes up a huge part of the theory of Trikomasana Yoga. Did it then get into Udayana? Did it then start to influence Vajrayana? Well, Vajrayana came right out of Shaivism, so there's no doubt it had influence on Vajrayana. Did it get into Dzogchen? By Udayana, are you referring to Dzogchen? Did it then affect Dzogchen a little bit? Wu Wei Taoism, which was also coming from that area a long time ago? Undoubtedly, there was some cross-pollination. We can't say